I am very pleased to introduce our speaker, our invited speaker, Professor Emil Nasritdinov, who is Associate Professor in the Department of Anthropology at the American University of Central Asia. This current year, he is visiting in the United States as a Fulbright scholar at George Washington University in Washington, D.C., working on the project titled Migration in Kyrgyzstan, Here, There, and in Between. He has two master's degrees, a Master of Urban and Regional Planning from the University of Hawaii at Manoa, as well as a Master of Architecture from the University of Illinois at Chicago. His PhD is from the University of Melbourne in Urban Planning with the title Regional Changes in Kyrgyzstan, Bazaars, Open Markets, and Social Networks. He has published on a wide range of topics on various aspects of Central Asian and especially Kyrgyz cultural and social history. Please welcome Professor Emil Nasritdinov.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Marianne and Asher, for bringing me here. And I'll talk about the research project that we have conducted quite a while ago. And this is the only thing I had which was closest to the concept of displacement. It is somewhat outdated, but in no way less relevant today in Kyrgyzstan. So that the issues that I'm going to raise are still as important as they were when we actually conducted this research. So the research was conducted as a part of this EACH4 project. It stands for environmental. I want to get back to you. I would like to give you a little bit of introduction. Particularly of the environmental situation in Kyrgyzstan. So if you look at the altitudes, right, the country is very high in the mountains, right? And more than 70% of the land is uninhabitable, because it is too high. And what you can also see, right, is that there is a fairly large range between the highest point, which is Peak Pagede, 7,439 meters, and the lowest point, right, in the Batken province. It's more than 7 kilometers. Right? With the area of approximately 200,000 square meters, 96% of the land is above the sea level. Right? So these high altitudes, right, and this major difference between the very high points, right, in the country and very low points in the valleys, and we have two major valleys. Here we have Kyu Valley, right, in the north, and Fergana Valley in the south, are one of the reasons why we have such a large number of environmental disasters. So if we, so you kind of these pictures illustrate the difference, right? If you look at sort of places where population lives, right, it's mostly again in the two valleys in the north, right, in the Chu Valley and in the south, and so that the red dots indicate the permanent settlements, but also because Kyrgyz still maintain a somewhat semi-nomadic lifestyle, right, and move, particularly in the summertime, with their animals in different pasture lands. Right? So there's quite a lot of areas which are defined as temporary or seasonal places for settlement. And sort of if you look at some of the major disasters, types of natural disasters that we have, right, these includes earthquakes, landslides, floods, high groundwaters, avalanches, and also the breakthroughs of the mountain walls. Okay? I'll go perhaps so that the floods are the most prominent, right, and they are followed by landslides, right. And if you look at the earthquakes, so this map illustrates the areas which are seismically active, right? So the red areas indicate the sort of the 9 degrees and higher of the seismic activity. The green areas of 8 degrees, right, and the yellows are of 7 degrees. So you can see that, yeah, the whole country is pretty much very seismically active. Up to 3,500 earthquakes take place almost every year, annually. Landslides are also one of the major types of natural disasters. So what we have here, so the red areas are the territories with landslides that are active almost annually, right? They take place every year. And then the pink ones are the areas with moderate activity of the landslides. Yeah, the green ones are the places where the landslide happen in kind of extreme situations, like during the earthquakes or particularly high, lots of rain, etc. And so in the country we have more than 5,000 active landslides, yeah, and more than 500 settlements and nearly 100,000 or 10,000 houses, right, households, are affected by the landslide activity. Many of them are potentially, right, in the need of replacement. We have the Ministry of Extreme Situation, right, Ministerstvo Čreзвычайной ситуации, that deals with households which are under threat yeah, sort of they regularly assess the length, the slopes of the mountains, to see whether the settlements are in danger or in the need of relocation. Then we have also, so these are the examples of landslides, right, from Kyrgyzstan. And you can see how dangerous they can be, right? So if you look at the houses, right, on the left side, the houses in the center, so that these were the houses that were ruined, you know, or basically covered by the mud that came from the landslide. And the landslide, you know, it can come at any time of the day, you know, at any time of the night. And there are many stories when the landslides took place at night. And when the landslide, some landslides come slowly, yeah, others just, you know, come very rapidly. And there are a number of stories where families were buried under the mud in the middle of the night while they were sleeping. And yeah, some more examples of landslides. Yeah, here you see a particularly large one. And you see how it is being destroyed by the landslide. Floods are also quite active, and one of perhaps the percentage-wise the largest, the largest kind of environmental disaster. And again, you can see the areas with the higher degree of danger from the flooding activities. And those that you can see on the map indicate the location of the high altitude lakes. Quite a lot of them, right? Some are larger, some are smaller, which potentially could break through, right, and lead to landslide or flooding. Yeah? So here are some of the examples. So these would be lower in the lower altitudes, and those would be in the higher altitudes. We have two types of floods. There's regular floods, and we have mud flood. And both are extremely dangerous. Yeah, and sort of here are some of the examples of the of flooding activity. And another type of natural disaster is avalanches. And again, you can see particularly the areas which are higher up in the mountains being more in danger. And again, looking at the map, you can see that more than half of the territory is potentially affected by avalanches. And the avalanches period lasts in Kyrgyzstan anywhere between 5 to 7 months. Here are some of the photos. Cars being buried in the avalanches. And another type of disaster is high groundwaters. Right? These are more common in the north, right? In the Chur Valley, particularly in the city of Bishkek, and places like Karabalka, Tokmok, a little bit in the Issyk-Kul, and to some degree in a few places in Osh. We have more than 3,000 square kilometers, and more than 300 settlements which are affected by high groundwaters. Right? And so these are some of the examples of high groundwaters. So the water just comes out from the ground, yeah? And particularly in the periods of heavy rains, the backyard can get flooded from nowhere, and this has very negative effect on the foundations of the buildings, and how they can be destroyed. More examples. Another type of environmental disaster that we've been looking at is the waste from mining industry. Kyrgyzstan has always been a place where Soviet Union produced its raw materials. Most of the industrial factories were actually located in Russia, right? But all the mining took place in the Soviet periphery. Kyrgyzstan was famous for, we don't have oil and gas, but we have a large number of minerals, gold, and also Soviets used to mine uranium. Right? And a number of places where uranium was mined from 1940s to about late 1960s. Right? And then once the uranium mines were closed, all the waste was stored in these so-called tailings. Right? And today we have nearly sort of all in the entire country, we have 92 objects with more than 250 million cubic meters of mining waste, which is dangerous for the environment and for people. We have 31 radioactive tailing sites with 7.2 billion cubic meters of radioactive waste, 5 toxic tailing sites with 5.2 million cubic meters, and 24 sites with mountainous rock dams or unprocessed ore sites with 3.3 billion cubic meters. And here is the map that shows where these sites are located. Right? So the radioactive tailing sites and toxic tailing sites. Quite a lot of them are in the north, right? Karabalka, Arlov, Artus, Kyrgyzstan is another place, Minkuch is one of the worst places, sort of Manisu in Jalabad. And today it's been more than half a century since the mines were closed, right, and the tailing sites were sort of sealed. There was some effort, particularly with the assistance of United Nations projects, to reinforce the tailing sites, right? But they're still in a fairly unstable condition, right? And because most of them are located along the major rivers, right? So if there is a spill, right, or if there is if tailing sites are ruined, or destroyed by flooding or landsliding activity, right, or by earthquakes, right, potentially this could lead to a regional scale, environmental disasters. And Uzbekistan would be the country that would be the most affected by it. Yeah, so here some of the examples. This one in Bordeaux. This is a tailing site in Artus, and you can see it's just next to the village itself, next to the town. It's just a few, it's about 100 meters distant from the building. There's a tailing site in Montrouge, and there are nearly 23 tailing sites in Manisour. Okay? Sort of these places are extremely, have very high levels of radiation. When we visit them, usually, like my own experience is that you spend a day there, and at least for 2 weeks you feel dizzy, and you sort of recover. And you have a number of people who live there, who were born there, yeah, they're still there. So in our research, we looked at a number of settlements. Most of them are located in the south of the country. And sort of when we're choosing the settlements, we try to do it proportionally. Right? Approximately 2/3 of natural and anthropogenic disasters take place in the south, right? And thus we took more settlements in the south, like 3 in the Razgun region, 3 in Karakoja region, 1 in Karasu region, etc. And yeah, and sort of in our research, we employed a questionnaire survey, face-to-face interviews, and we've interviewed migrant families. Right? So families that were forced, right, to move from the places of environmental disasters, and also 36 families that decided not to migrate. Right? They had a choice, right? They had an option. Usually, the Ministry of Extreme Situation, they come and say, they offer you a land. Right? Sometimes, in particularly dangerous cases, they just force you out of the house and they destroy the house, so that you cannot stay there. And the government tries to find land for people who are relocated, and they provide some financial assistance for building a new house. Okay? Yeah, and they also have conducted expert interviews, and yeah, and so if you look at the migrant families, right? One of the most kind of interesting findings that we had, right, is that a lot of natural disasters, or the disasters that we perceive as natural, right, such as floods and particularly landslides, right, actually have very strong anthropogenic roots. Right? Just like Professor Rossabi described the case of Mongolia, Kyrgyzstan is no different. In the pre-Soviet times, Kyrgyz nomads were quite mobile, right? Sort of, they never settled in one place. They always moved from one pasture to the next pasture. Right? And so if the pasture was overgrazed, they would just move to another one. Right? And sort of that provided, so that was the reason why the pasture lands were not eroded, right? And kept grass in good quality. Yet, during Soviet times, when kolkhozes and sovkhozes were established, there was much less mobility, right? But still, there were special experts, right, who regularly assessed the quality of pasture. Right? This was an important task, right? And many kolkhozes and sovkhozes maintained it. Right? So if they were to find that the pasture land is being overgrazed, right, they would close it for grazing. Right? And so what happened, right, is with the breakup of the Soviet Union and privatization, right, there is a difference with the Mongolian case because not only animals were privatized, the land was privatized as well. Right? Every family in the Caucasus and South was given a certain portion of land for agricultural activity, and pasture lands were also divided. Right? So each family, or a number of families will have one pasture land, and another group of families will have another pasture land. Right? And so what that leads to, right, is that because in the Soviet period there were salaries, right, in Caucasus and Caucasus, there were additional forms of income. Nowadays, well, agriculture is mostly used for one's own production, one's family production, consumption. But animal husbandry become the main source of income, right, in rural areas. And in the time of harsh kind of economic conditions, every family tries to maximize the profit that they get from animal husbandry. Right? And migration also plays an important role in this, because when families send their children to Russia, right, and those send money in the forms of remittances, right, the major kind of form of investment, right, is to in the purchase of more animals, right? And because of that, what you see is that the number of animals, just like in Mongolia, has increased scale, right, significantly, and that leads to the overgrazing of pasture, right? And that leads to erosion. So, one reason of the high landsliding activity, right, is the erosion of pasture. Right? Usually, when there is grass on the slope, right, the rain comes, on the top of that and sort of goes down the slope, right? When there is not enough grass, the water is absorbed by the soil, right? And eventually the soil becomes unstable, right? And that leads to landslide. Yeah. If you look at the answers of the migrant families, they have identified environmental factors as one of the major reasons. Crops are not grown paseo, in 70% of migrants indicated that their harvest in the last few years has significantly increased. And there's a number of causes that they're listing here. And because my time is limited, I might need to skip a few of the details. Animal husbandry, if you look at the answers of respondents, 86% of migrants used to keep their animals, and 63% were completely dependent on them, while 32% were mostly dependent. The income has been declining, and partly because of the economic difficulties, but also because of the poor quality of raising them. The major conclusion that we developed here, right, is that the stock breeding is not so much the factor that is affected by the environmental problems, but more the factor that actually contributes to it. If you look at the causes of migration, environmental problems were the main reasons indicated by our respondents. 91% mentioned sudden environmental disasters. In our example, mostly landslides. 84% slow environmental degradation. 65% mentioned health problem caused by unhealthy environment. If you look at the life of migrant families, in the majority of cases, the economic situation of the family declines, right? Becomes worse. One of the reasons for that is the shortage of land, particularly in the south of the country. Most of the land is already distributed. Right? And so when people are forced to move from their settlements, right, to other localities, the government gives them land which is very small, right? So they give like 400 square meters or 800 square meters at most. Yeah, and usually of a very poor quality, right? So it wouldn't be arable, it'd be in the higher altitudes, and would be difficult to use for agriculture. Right? Secondly, when people from come to the new locations, the pastoralists are already distributed, right? So they have no place to raise their own animals. Right? And one of the most common scenarios there is that once family is relocated, and traditionally they don't relocate very far. Yeah, usually it's like 78 kilometers, from the original settlement. They keep someone in the family, in the house, but then the family moves further. Right? Like in the case of Mongolia, this would be Ulaanbaatar. In the case of Kyrgyzstan, that would be the capital Bishkek or Russia. Right? They also lose their lands, animals, and savings. Yeah, they lose their jobs or the main sources of income, agriculture and stockbroking, something that they've been doing for a long time. And basically, they have to start their life from scratch in the new places. And some very interesting cases where families are relocated to the settlements. To the places where which are themselves, affected by environmental disasters. Right? We had a case where sort of one village was moved to another location because of the landslide, and in 3 or 4 years of living on the locality, a new slide developed, just next to that new village. Yeah? And the money that the government gives is not that significant, right? Usually enough just to build really just a basic structure. What is also important is that once family move, they lose their social networks. Right? And for Kyrgyz people, the social connections, the tribal connections, is everything. Right? If you live in the locality where you don't belong to the tribe, right, to the group, right, you are more than likely to be excluded, from the community. So we can see that nearly for 80% of migrants, their social networks are lost. So if you look at the scenario, for migrant families, right, you can see animal husbandry, leading to overgrazing, leading to landslides, migration, and this leads to further poverty, lost social networks, and the lost cultural media. For non-migrant families, there's a number of people who refuse to migrate. Right? For all the same reasons that I had just mentioned, right? They don't want to lose their sources of income, right? They don't want to lose their pasture lands. They don't want to lose the social connections, right? And many of them have been born into these places, so that they're very much attached to them. Yeah, so they don't. And the result, right, is that you see on one hand you see a very kind of aging population, right? It's mostly elderly people who remain in the villages, while the young ones either decided to migrate or actually move to Russia. The social life becomes disintegrated, right? If 60% of the village has moved out, right? And many of them are your relatives and your kin, right? That affects your life. Degrading infrastructure, and also demoralization, right? Particularly in places like Minkush or Malisu, places which are affected by radiation, we observe very high levels of alcohol addiction, right? What is this belief, a myth, right, that if you drink 100 grams of vodka every day, that kills the effect of radiation. Nobody has proven that true, but people drink, And when we were asking and talking to them about their plans for the future, right? Sort of many families from these radioactive zones, right? They had the intention to do that, right? But many simply didn't have resources, right? We've interviewed one family who was given this money, to relocate, but they just consumed it, right? And they could not get another one amount, right? And so they had to stay. And they lived in these very hard conditions. We interviewed one lady who said, my husband died 3 years ago because of cancer. My grandchild has a heart disease, and I want to leave. I worry about the future of my children, but she couldn't. Right? But the families from the areas which are affected by landslides mostly want to stay. Right? Again, for all those reasons that I mentioned. And economic situation, and I'm nearly finished, for non-migrant families is better than for the migrant families because they keep their animals, right? They still have access to pasture lands, and even more pasture lands since half of the village has migrated, right? And so, yeah, economically, they are better off. However, it is also affected by the worsening environmental situation. And more than anything, there is a psychological effect, right? And there's this pressure, living under the landslide and knowing that any time of the day or any night, right, your house can be completely destroyed, right, and your family can be killed. Builds up the pressure, right, and so in the conclusion, right, if we look at the migration caused by environmental factors, we can see, migration is a big part of Kyrgyz life nowadays, right? We have nearly 1/6 of the country's population working away, right? Either in Russia or in Kazakhstan or elsewhere in Turkey. But in Kyrgyzstan, it has very strong environmental flavor. Environmental problem causing migration and displacement of large groups mostly bring negative, deteriorating impacts on the life of local communities. And it's not the choice, really, right? Environmental migration. It's a solution with no wins scenario, right? With both those who migrate and those who stay losing, right? They lose their social networks that they build during their lifetime. They lose their livelihood strategies, which are inherited from many generations of their forefathers. And their culture, which is strongly connected to tribal identity and unity, also disappears. So a couple of recommendations that we make in our report. We are suggesting that it's important to address causes, right, not the consequences. So far, it's been almost always a kind of a top-down approach, right? Either on the side of the government and sometimes with the help of international organizations. So the bottom-up strategies are also important. And we suggest looking into reviving traditional new methods of agriculture, animal husbandry, and reviving the aboriginal breeds of sheep and sorts of fruits and vegetables that are less harmful to the pasture lands and to the